My wife said she was going to a boring family reunion in Denver. But then I saw her aunt's post. A lavish engagement party. With my wife in a nice gown. Her family raised champagne, laughing, while I sat 90 miles away, uninvited. So I posted one photo. And their perfect night shattered. You know how some mornings start with sunshine streaming through your kitchen window and birds chirping like they're auditioning for a Disney movie? Yeah, well, this wasn't one of those mornings. This was more like a Netflix true crime documentary waiting to happen, complete with suspicious behavior and terrible acting. I was sitting at our scratched-up kitchen table in our modest Colorado ranch house, doing what any red-blooded American does at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, wrestling with a piece of toast that had apparently been engineered by NASA to resist all forms of butter application. The thing was tougher than my college calculus final, and about as appetizing as watching paint dry in slow motion. But hey, carbs are carbs, and I needed fuel for what I thought was going to be a perfectly normal weekend of absolutely nothing productive. Clara was perched on the edge of her chair like she was sitting on a live wire, clutching her iPhone like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Now, my wife's always been attached to her phone. Hell, most of us are these days. But this was different. This was hostage negotiation level intensity. Her knuckles were white, her jaw was clenched, and she kept glancing at me like I might suddenly develop X-ray vision and see through the damn thing. The phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then it lit up with what looked like a text message that made her face go through more expressions than a mime having an existential crisis. Her eyebrows shot up, her mouth dropped open slightly. Then she quickly composed herself like someone had just reminded her she was being watched by hidden cameras. Here's where things got interesting. One swipe. That's all it took. One quick flick of her thumb, and whatever message had just turned her into a human question mark vanished faster than my paycheck after rent's due. Poof. Gone. Like it never existed. Like my self-respect at last year's Castillo family Christmas dinner when her dad asked me, for the third time, what my 5-year career trajectory looked like while I was mid-bite into a dinner roll. "Everything okay, babe?" I asked, trying to sound casual while internally cataloging every micro-expression that had just flickered across her face. You know that feeling when you're watching a movie and you can tell something big is about to happen, but you're not sure if it's going to be good big or hide behind the couch big. That was this moment. Clara looked up at me with a smile so sweet it could have given me diabetes on the spot. The kind of smile that screams, "I'm about to tell you something that's technically true but morally questionable." The kind politicians use when they're explaining why they definitely didn't know about that thing they definitely knew about. "Oh, absolutely fine," she chirped, her voice hitting that particular octave that all married men learn to fear. "Just family stuff. Actually, I have to head to Denver today for a boring family reunion." Boring. Family. Reunion. Let me paint you a picture of Clara's family for a hot second. The Castillos don't do boring the way normal people don't do space travel. These are people who consider it a slow Tuesday if there isn't at least one charity gala, wine tasting, or casual dinner party that costs more than my monthly car payment. Their idea of roughing it is staying at a 4-star hotel instead of a 5-star resort. They buy champagne by the crate instead of by the bottle, and they probably have their toilet paper monogrammed. So when Clara, sweet, honest, wouldn't hurt a fly Clara, tells me her family is having a boring reunion, my internal BS detector started beeping louder than a smoke alarm with a dying battery. But here's the thing about being married to someone for 3 years. You learn to pick your battles. And sometimes, even when every instinct you have is screaming that something's off, you just smile and nod because maybe, just maybe, you're being paranoid. "Right?" I said, forcing a laugh that sounded about as natural as a $3 bill. "Boring. Your family. Sure, that tracks." I took another bite of my concrete toast and watched her stuff her phone into her designer purse, the one her mother bought her because apparently my gift suggestions weren't sophisticated enough. Clara stood up with the kind of energy that suggested she couldn't get out of that kitchen fast enough, like the place was suddenly radioactive. She grabbed her keys, her purse, and what looked like an overnight bag that I definitely hadn't seen her pack. When exactly had she packed that thing? Had she snuck around the house at dawn like some kind of suburban ninja, carefully folding clothes while I was still drooling on my pillow? "Don't wait up," she said, planting a quick kiss on my forehead. The kind of kiss you give your elderly aunt at Thanksgiving, polite but distant. I'll probably be late. You know how these family things go. Actually, I didn't know how these family things went because I was rarely invited to them. But that's a whole different can of worms that I wasn't ready to open at 7:30 on a Saturday morning. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with my battle-scarred toast and the lingering scent of her perfume, the expensive stuff that smells like flowers and secrets. I sat there for a minute, chewing thoughtfully and staring at the spot where she'd been sitting, trying to shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed the opening act of something much bigger and messier than a boring family reunion. The kitchen felt different somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. Even Max, our golden retriever mix, seemed to sense something was off. He patted over and rested his chin on my knee, looking up at me with those big, soulful eyes that seemed to say, "Dude, I'm just a dog." But even I know that was weird. "I know, buddy," I muttered, scratching behind his ears. "I know. But here's the thing about gut feelings. They're like that friend who always tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it." And my gut was practically screaming that Clara's mysterious text message and sudden family reunion were about as connected as peanut butter and jelly. The question was, did I really want to know what kind of sandwich they were making? I finished my toast, cleared the table, and tried to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. So what if she was being secretive? So what if her family suddenly decided to have a reunion? People are allowed to have private family business, right? Right? But as I stood there in our quiet kitchen, looking out at the Colorado morning that had started so normally, I couldn't shake the feeling that something smelled fishy. And for once, it definitely wasn't my overcooked eggs. All right, let me back up and paint you the full picture of what I got myself into when I said, "I do" to Clara Castillo. Because understanding her family is like trying to explain quantum physics to a toddler. It's complicated, it doesn't make sense, and someone's probably going to end up crying. The Castillos are what people in Colorado call Old Denver money, which is basically code for, "We've been rich since before your great-grandparents were even a twinkle in someone's eye." We're talking about the kind of family that has streets named after them, not because they did anything particularly heroic, but because they owned half the city back when Denver was still figuring out what it wanted to be when it grew up. These people don't just have money, they have the kind of wealth that comes with its own gravitational pull. They're the type who iron their socks, and I'm not even kidding about that. I once walked into Clara's childhood bedroom and found her mother, Beatrice, literally pressing wrinkles out of tube socks with military precision. When I asked why, she looked at me like I'd just suggested we eat cereal with a fork and said, "Standards, dear. Standards." And don't even get me started on their dogs. They have 2 golden Labradors, not golden retrievers, mind you, but actual Labradors imported from some fancy British kennel, named Mozart and Vivaldi. Mozart and Vivaldi. I suggested they get a 3rd dog and name it Snoop Dogg, and the silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it at one of their dinner parties. The first time I met Clara was at a marketing conference in downtown Denver. I was there representing the small digital agency I worked for, trying not to spill coffee on my one decent suit, while networking with people who had business cards printed on paper that probably cost more than my lunch. She was there representing her family's charitable foundation, which is apparently what rich people call their tax write-offs. I was standing by the coffee station, wrestling with one of those industrial espresso machines that looks like it requires a PhD to operate, when this absolutely stunning woman in a navy blazer walked up and just casually made the perfect cappuccino like she was conducting a symphony orchestra. "First time?" she asked, and I swear her voice had this musical quality that made me forget I was supposed to be networking instead of staring like an idiot. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, gesturing at the puddle of coffee I'd somehow created on the counter. She laughed, not one of those polite little chuckles people do at networking events, but a real, genuine laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Don't worry, I've been coming to these things since I was 16. My parents believe in early professional development. That should have been my first red flag right there. What kind of parents drag their teenager to marketing conferences?" But instead of running for the hills, I was completely enchanted. Clara was funny, sharp as a tack, and had these incredible green eyes that seemed to see right through all the corporate BS that usually fills these events. We ended up talking for 2 hours, way longer than any normal networking conversation. She told me about her work with the foundation, how they funded educational programs for underprivileged kids, and I told her about my dreams of starting my own marketing firm someday. She listened like what I was saying actually mattered, not like she was waiting for her turn to talk about herself. When she suggested we continue the conversation over dinner, I thought I'd won the lottery. Here was this incredible woman who seemed genuinely interested in me. Not my bank account, not my connections, just me. The guy who clips coupons and considers Olive Garden a fancy night out. Our first date was at this little Italian place in Capitol Hill that I'd been saving up to try. I was nervous as hell, rehearsing conversation topics in my head like I was preparing for a job interview. But Clara put me at ease immediately. She ordered wine without looking at the prices, but she didn't make me feel cheap when I ordered the house special. She asked about my family, my hobbies, my thoughts on everything from movies to politics to whether pineapple belongs on pizza. For the record, it absolutely does, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong. The second red flag should have been when she casually mentioned that her family owned a few properties around town. In Castillo speak, a few properties apparently means half of Cherry Creek and a vacation home in Aspen that's bigger than my entire apartment building. But by then, I was already falling hard. Clara had this way of making me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room, even when the room was full of people who probably had more money in their checking accounts than I'd see in a lifetime. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. She remembered little details about things I'd mentioned weeks earlier. She made me feel like I was enough, exactly as I was. 6 months later, when I was getting ready to propose with a ring I'd been making payments on for 3 months, I finally met her parents. Oscar and Beatrice Castillo live in a house that could comfortably fit a small village. We're talking about the kind of place that has a name instead of just an address, complete with a circular driveway, fountain, and probably its own zip code. Oscar greeted me with a handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted, and immediately started asking about my career trajectory and investment portfolio. When I told him I was still building my savings, he made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh, like the idea of someone my age not having a diversified stock portfolio was mildly amusing. Beatrice was even worse. She had this way of asking questions that sounded polite on the surface, but were actually calculated to make me feel like an intruder at their country club. "Oh, how interesting that you went to state school," she'd say, as if I'd told her I'd been raised by wolves. "And you're in marketing? How practical." Then there was Marisol, Clara's cousin and Instagram influencer extraordinaire. This girl could find a way to work her follower count into a conversation about the weather. She treated me like I was some kind of exotic pet that Clara had brought home from the shelter. "This is so cute," she'd squeal whenever Clara and I did anything remotely couple-like, as if watching regular people in love was entertainment for her. But I endured it all because I was head over heels crazy about Clara. I figured that love could conquer anything, including disapproving in-laws and a family that seemed to view me as temporary entertainment. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, if I was respectful and patient and proved myself worthy, they'd eventually accept me as one of their own. Spoiler alert, love doesn't cover the entrance fees to their exclusive little circus. And as I was about to find out, being the outsider looking in was about to become a whole lot more literal than I ever imagined. So there I was, sitting in my kitchen after Clara's grand exit, trying to process what had just happened while Max stared at me with those "your wife is acting weird, and even I know it" eyes. The whole boring family reunion thing was rattling around in my head like a marble in a coffee can, making about as much sense as a screen door on a submarine. Let me explain something about Castillo family gatherings. These people don't do anything halfway, especially not family events. When Clara's great-aunt turned 90 last year, they rented out an entire ballroom at the Brown Palace Hotel, hired a string quartet, and served caviar like it was party mix. For a Tuesday afternoon birthday party. When her cousin graduated college, they threw a celebration that involved ice sculptures and a 5-course meal prepared by a chef who'd apparently cooked for some European royalty I'd never heard of. These are not, "let's grab some Subway sandwiches and catch up" kind of people. The Castillos treat casual get-togethers like military operations, complete with event planners, coordinated outfits, and enough flowers to supply a small wedding. So when Clara told me this reunion was going to be boring, I knew something was up. That's like saying a hurricane is going to be a little breezy. But Clara, God bless her, really committed to the performance. After she'd grabbed her mysterious overnight bag and headed for the door, She paused and turned back to me with this incredibly convincing look of wifely concern. You know what? She said, like the thought had just occurred to her. Why don't you call Ron? Maybe you guys could hang out, watch the game or something. Have a guy's day. Watch the game. Right. Because apparently, when your wife disappears to a secret family function, the appropriate response is to crack open a beer and zone out in front of ESPN like some kind of Neanderthal. It was like she'd taken a class in How to Manage Your Husband 101, and this was her final exam. Which game? I asked, because I'm nothing if not thorough in my sarcasm. She waved her hand dismissively, like the specifics didn't matter. Any game. Football, basketball, whatever's on. You love sports. For the record, I like sports about as much as I like root canals performed by caffeinated squirrels. But Clara had apparently decided that all men are genetically programmed to enjoy watching other men run around with balls, so that was going to be my designated activity while she attended her boring family event. It's just golf and family chit-chat, she continued, her voice taking on that sing-song quality that meant she was really selling this story hard. You'd be bored out of your mind. Uncle Richard is going to talk about his stamp collection for like 3 hours. Aunt Patricia will show everyone pictures of her cats. It's going to be painfully dull. Now, I'd met Uncle Richard exactly twice in 3 years of marriage. The man collected vintage wines that cost more than my monthly salary and had opinions about everything from international politics to the proper way to fold napkins. The idea of him getting excited about stamps was about as believable as me suddenly developing an interest in competitive yodeling. And Aunt Patricia? That woman doesn't just have cats. She has what can only be described as a feline empire. 3 Persian cats with names longer than most people's resumes, each one groomed to perfection and probably insured for more money than my car is worth. When she talks about her cats, it's not boring. It's like listening to a proud parent discuss their children's acceptance to Harvard. But there Clara stood, spinning this tale of tedious family bonding while checking her phone every 30 seconds like she was expecting some kind of urgent update. The whole performance was so over the top that I almost wanted to applaud. Golf, huh? I said, deciding to play along. Your family does love their golf. Exactly, she said, looking relieved that I wasn't pushing for more details. Just a casual round, nothing fancy. Very low-key. Low-key. The Castillos. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. These are people who probably have their golf balls monogrammed. When Oscar plays golf, he wears outfits that cost more than some people's rent, and he brings along enough equipment to supply a small pro shop. The man has golf shoes for different types of grass, for crying out loud. Clara kissed me on the forehead, that same distant, dismissive kiss from earlier, and headed toward the garage. I'll call you later, she said over her shoulder. Love you. And then she was gone, leaving me standing in my kitchen in yesterday's t-shirt and pajama pants, feeling like I'd just been professionally managed out of my own marriage. I wandered into the living room and flopped down on our couch, which, let me tell you, has seen better days. The thing sags in the middle like a hammock, and there's a mysterious stain on one of the cushions that we've both been pretending doesn't exist for the better part of 2 years. It's not exactly the kind of furniture you'd find in a Castillo home, where even the throw pillows probably have pedigrees. Max followed me and settled at my feet, resting his chin on his paws with a heavy sigh that seemed to sum up the entire situation. Even the dog knew something was off. I grabbed the remote and started channel surfing, not because I actually wanted to watch TV, but because Clara had basically prescribed it as my designated activity for the day. Sports, she'd said. Any game. As if all sports were interchangeable background noise designed to keep husbands occupied while important family business happened elsewhere. I landed on some baseball game. Cubs versus somebody. I wasn't really paying attention and tried to settle in for a day of willful ignorance. But my mind kept wandering back to Clara's performance in the kitchen. The way she'd avoided eye contact when she talked about the reunion. The mysterious text message that had disappeared faster than free pizza at a college party. The overnight bag that had materialized out of nowhere. And then there was the way she dismissed me so completely, like I was some kind of pet that needed to be given a chew toy to keep busy while the adults handled real life. Watch sports, she'd said, like that was all I was capable of understanding. I sat there on my saggy couch, eating stale cereal straight from the box and watching grown men hit a ball with a stick, trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe her family really was having a boring reunion. Maybe I was just feeling left out and reading too much into perfectly innocent behavior. But deep down, I knew better. In my gut, I could feel it. Something was coming. Something big and messy and complicated, like a storm building on the horizon. And I was about to get caught right in the middle of it, armed with nothing but a bowl of cereal and a dog who was probably smarter than I was. Saturday night rolled around like a freight train carrying a cargo full of bad decisions and regret. I'd spent the entire day doing exactly what Clara had prescribed, sitting on my ass, watching sports, and pretending like I wasn't slowly losing my mind wondering what kind of boring family reunion required an overnight bag and that level of secrecy. I'd made it through 9 innings of baseball, 2/4 of some college football game I didn't care about, and half of a basketball game where I couldn't even tell you which teams were playing. Max had given up on me around hour 3 and retreated to his bed in the corner, occasionally lifting his head to give me those judgmental dog looks that seemed to say, "Dude, this is pathetic even for you." By 9 p.m., I was sprawled on the couch in my finest Saturday night attire, the same pajama pants I'd been wearing since Clara left, a t-shirt that had seen better decades, and socks with holes in them that I kept meaning to throw away, but never did. I was living the dream, folks. Peak American masculinity right there. I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone, alternating between checking Clara's social media, nothing posted since yesterday, and watching TikToks of people doing things that were infinitely more interesting than my current existence, when my screen lit up with a notification that made my blood pressure spike, like I'd just chugged a Red Bull energy drink. Instagram. Clara's Aunt Lydia had posted something. Now, Aunt Lydia is what you might charitably call social media enthusiastic. This woman documents her life like she's filming a reality show, complete with professional quality photos of everything from her morning latte art to her pedicures. She's got more followers than some minor celebrities, and she uses her Instagram account like a combination family newsletter and lifestyle blog. The notification showed a little preview of her latest post, and I could see just enough to make my heart start doing that thing where it feels like it's trying to escape through my throat. There were people in formal wear. There was champagne. There were flowers that definitely didn't come from the grocery store floral section. I tapped on the notification with the kind of dread usually reserved for opening medical test results or tax audit letters. The caption hit me like a punch to the gut. "So proud of Diego's engagement tonight. Our family is growing. Clinking glasses sparkles hashtag Castillo family hashtag engagement hashtag Denver hashtag family love hashtag blessed." Engagement. Engagement. I stared at that word like it was written in a foreign language I was supposed to understand, but couldn't quite grasp. Diego, Clara's younger brother. The golden child who'd graduated from CU Boulder with a business degree and immediately landed some high-paying job at a tech startup because, of course, everything came easy to the Castillo kids. But it wasn't just the caption that made my world tilt sideways like a carnival ride operated by drunk teenagers. It was the photos. Oh, sweet Lord in heaven, the photos. I swiped through them with growing horror, each image like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. There was Diego, looking like he'd stepped out of a menswear catalog, standing next to a gorgeous blonde woman I'd never seen before, both of them holding up champagne flutes and beaming like they'd just won the lottery. And there, in the background of every single photo, was the Castillo family in all their formal glory. Oscar in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Beatrice in some flowing gown that looked like it belonged at the Met Gala. Cousin Marisol posing like she was auditioning for America's Next Top Model, making sure her face was visible in every shot, even though this wasn't her party. But it was the third photo that really twisted the knife. There was Clara, my wife, my supposedly devoted partner in this thing we called marriage, looking absolutely radiant in a dress I'd never seen before. Not just any dress, mind you, but a stunning emerald green number that probably cost more than my car payment. Her hair was done up in some elaborate style that definitely hadn't happened in our bathroom mirror, and she was holding a champagne flute like she was posing for a magazine spread. She looked beautiful. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged exactly where she was, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, white linens that probably had thread counts higher than my credit score, and enough floral arrangements to supply a small wedding. And where was I during this magical family moment? 90 miles away, sitting on my sagging couch in hole-riddled socks, raising a slice of cold leftover pizza like it was my own pathetic version of a champagne toast. I zoomed in on Clara's face in the photo, studying her expression like I was analyzing evidence in a crime scene. That smile, I knew that smile. It was her genuine happiness smile, not the polite one she wore at work functions or the patient one she used when my buddies told inappropriate jokes. This was real joy, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The whole family was there, raising their glasses in what was obviously a well-orchestrated toast. Uncle Richard with his vintage wine knowledge. Aunt Patricia probably taking breaks to show everyone new pictures of her prize-winning Persians. All of them celebrating Diego's big moment, creating memories and strengthening family bonds, and doing all those things that functional families do. All of them except me, the husband. The guy who'd been married into this family for 3 years and apparently still didn't rate an invitation to major life events. I kept scrolling through the photos, each one driving the point home a little harder. There were shots of the happy couple cutting what looked like an engagement cake. Photos of family members giving speeches that I couldn't hear but could imagine. Probably heartfelt words about love and commitment and building a future together. Images of everyone hugging and laughing and being genuinely happy for Diego and his fiancée. It was like looking at photos from a parallel universe where I didn't exist, where Clara had a whole other life, complete with family celebrations and formal events and moments of pure joy that didn't include me even as an afterthought. I screenshotted every single photo because some masochistic part of me wanted evidence of this betrayal. Proof that while I'd been sitting at home like an obedient golden retriever, my wife had been living it up at what was clearly the social event of the season. The timestamp on the photos showed they'd been taken just an hour ago, which meant right now, as I sat in my living room having an existential crisis, Clara was probably still there, probably still laughing and toasting and pretending like she didn't have a husband at home wondering what the hell was going on. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail, of course. Because when you're busy celebrating family milestones, apparently the last thing you want is an inconvenient phone call from your spouse. So I did what any mature, emotionally stable adult would do in this situation. I texted her a message dripping with so much passive-aggressive sarcasm that it could have been weaponized. Congrats on the boring reunion. Diego's engagement looks super tedious. Really glad you saved me from all that golf and stamp collecting. Face with rolling eyes. Then I sat there, phone in hand, waiting for her response like a teenager waiting to see if their crush would text back. The 3 little dots appeared and disappeared about 15 times over the next 2 hours before I finally got a response that was shorter than a grocery list and about as warm as a January morning in Colorado. Can't talk. Can't talk. Can't talk. She was at a party, not a hostage situation, not a business meeting, not performing emergency surgery, but a party, a family celebration. And she couldn't spare 2 minutes to explain why she'd lied to her husband about where she was and what she was doing. I laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of it all, startling Max awake from his peaceful slumber. He lifted his head and gave me that look that seemed to say, "Bro, even I know you're being played, and I'm a dog who gets excited about tennis balls." That's when it hit me. Sitting there in my pajama pants, looking at photos of my wife living her best life without me, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. If they didn't want me in their perfect family picture, then maybe it was time to make my own picture. One that would make them all remember exactly who they decided to leave out. Let me paint you the full picture of how pathetic my Saturday night had become, because sometimes you need to really marinate in your own misery before you can do something productive with it. There I was, sitting on my couch that had more personality than a reality TV star. And by personality, I mean mysterious stains and structural issues that made sitting anywhere except the exact center a gamble with gravity. Picture this scene like you're directing a movie about the world's most underwhelming midlife crisis. Interior, dimly lit living room that screams, "We shop at Target and aren't ashamed of it." Our protagonist, yours truly, is wearing pajama pants that have seen more action than a Hollywood stuntman, a t-shirt advertising a band I saw in college back when I still had dreams, and those tragic socks with holes that I keep promising myself I'll replace, but never do because apparently I hate myself. The coffee table in front of me looked like the aftermath of a very sad bachelor party. Empty pizza box, because I'd stress-eaten my way through 6 slices of questionable pepperoni. A half-empty beer that had gone warm about 2 hours ago, my laptop balanced precariously on a stack of magazines that Clara kept buying but never read, and my phone, which had become both my window into my wife's secret life and my primary source of emotional damage. And there, sitting at my feet like the world's most loyal witness to my humiliation, was Max. This dog had been with me through thick and thin, mostly thin, let's be honest, and right now he was giving me those eyes that dogs master somewhere around puppyhood. You know the look I'm talking about. The one that says, "I love you unconditionally, but bro, you're kind of a mess right now, and even I can see that your wife is playing games with you." Max had positioned himself so he could see both me and the TV, like he was trying to decide which was more entertaining, the baseball game I'd given up pretending to watch or the live-action breakdown happening right next to him. Every few minutes, he'd tilt his head at me with this expression that I swear was the canine equivalent of "Dude, seriously?" Meanwhile, 90 miles away in Denver, my wife was living her best life at what was apparently the social event of the season. I kept refreshing Aunt Lydia's Instagram post, watching the likes and comments pile up like digital salt in my emotional wounds. Congratulations to the happy couple. Party popper. What a beautiful celebration. Red heart. The Castillo family knows how to throw a party. Clinking glasses. Each notification was like a tiny knife twist, reminding me that there was a whole celebration happening that I wasn't just uninvited to. I was actively lied to about. Clara had looked me in the eye, told me it was going to be boring, suggested I watch sports like some kind of domesticated caveman, and then waltzed off to participate in what looked like a cross between a royal wedding and a scene from The Great Gatsby. I found myself zooming in on the photos again, studying them like I was a detective trying to solve a murder case. There was Uncle Richard, not talking about stamp collections, but raising what looked like a glass of wine that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. There was Aunt Patricia, not showing cat photos but elegantly posed next to an ice sculpture that had been carved into the shape of intertwined hearts. And there was the rest of the family, all dressed to the nines, all looking genuinely happy to be celebrating Diego's engagement. All of them except me, the husband, the guy who'd been foolish enough to think that being married meant being included. The worst part wasn't even that I'd been excluded, though that stung like getting a paper cut and then accidentally squeezing lemon juice on it. The worst part was how easily Clara had lied to me, how smoothly she'd delivered that performance about boring family chit-chat and golf. How she'd suggested I entertain myself with sports like I was a toddler who needed to be distracted with cartoons while the adults handled important business. I kept thinking about that kiss on the forehead she'd given me before leaving. That patronizing little peck that felt more like something you'd give your elderly uncle at Thanksgiving than your husband of 3 years. It was the kind of kiss that said there, without actually saying the words. And her text response, "Can't talk," was still burning in my brain like a neon sign advertising my own irrelevance. Can't talk. At a party. Surrounded by family. With an open bar and probably enough small talk to fuel a small town for a week. But she couldn't spare 2 minutes to explain to her husband why she'd felt the need to lie about where she was and what she was doing. I tried to imagine what she was doing right at that moment. Probably making small talk with relatives about her boring life with her husband who watches sports. Maybe laughing about how easy it had been to get me to stay home. Possibly not thinking about me at all, which was somehow worse than being actively dismissed. The thing is, I'd always known I was the outsider in the Castillo family. From day one, they treated me like Clara's little hobby, something she'd picked up and brought home that they were politely told her. You know that moment in every action movie where the quiet, unassuming guy finally snaps and decides he's not going to take it anymore? Yeah, well, this was my Bruce Willis in Die Hard moment, except instead of crawling through air vents to fight terrorists, I was sitting on my sagging couch planning to weaponize social media against my own in-laws. Not exactly the stuff of Hollywood blockbusters, but we work with what we've got. The decision hit me like a lightning bolt of petty inspiration. If the Castillo family wanted to play games, if they wanted to exclude me from major family events while pretending it was for my own good, then maybe it was time they learned that actions have consequences. And in 2023, consequences come with hashtags and viral potential. I hauled myself off the couch with the kind of determination usually reserved for people training for marathons or starting new businesses. Max looked up at me with what I swear was approval, like he'd been waiting all night for me to grow a backbone and do something other than refresh Instagram while eating cold pizza. First things first, I needed to look the part. You can't deliver a devastating social media blow while looking like you've given up on life, even if you technically have. I trudged to the bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror, which was about as encouraging as a performance review from your least favorite boss. My hair was doing that thing where it sticks up in 12 different directions, like I'd been struck by lightning or had spent the evening wrestling with existential dread, which, to be fair, I had. My t-shirt had somehow acquired a mysterious stain that could have been pizza sauce or the physical manifestation of my disappointment in humanity. And my eyes had that slightly wild look of a man who'd just discovered his wife was leading a double life. I splashed some water on my face, ran my fingers through my hair until it looked at least somewhat intentional, and changed into my best. I'm hurt, but I'm handling it like a mature adult shirt, a navy blue button-down that Clara had bought me for Christmas last year, back when she still pretended to care about my appearance at family functions. Then I positioned myself in front of our bookshelf, which was one of the few things in our house that looked remotely sophisticated. It was loaded with a mix of my business books, Clara's collection of novels she never read but bought because they looked good on Instagram, and a few random items that screamed, "We're educated people with interests beyond Netflix and takeout." The lighting was important. I wanted to look like a man who was processing betrayal with dignity and perhaps a touch of philosophical resignation. Not like a guy who'd just spent 6 hours having a breakdown while his dog judged him. I angled my phone to catch the soft light from the table lamp, the kind of moody illumination that says, "I'm wounded but photogenic." Then came the face. This was crucial. I couldn't look too angry. That would make me seem unhinged. I couldn't look too sad. That would make me seem pathetic. I needed to nail that perfect expression of someone who'd been hurt, but wasn't going to let it break him. Someone who was disappointed, but not destroyed. Someone who could turn betrayal into social media gold. I practiced a few different expressions, feeling slightly ridiculous, but also oddly empowered. There was the "I'm fine," really smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The thoughtful, slightly melancholy look that suggested deep contemplation. The raised eyebrow that implied I found the whole situation more amusing than devastating. After about 15 attempts that made me look like I was having some kind of facial seizure, I finally nailed it. The perfect blend of hurt and dignity, with just a hint of, "I'm about to blow up your spot," lurking behind my eyes. Now for the caption. This was where the magic would happen. I needed something that would tell the whole story without seeming petty, something that would generate sympathy without making me look like I was begging for attention, something that would make the Castillos squirm without technically being an attack. I started typing, deleting, retyping. The first draft was too angry. The second was too whiny. The third made me sound like I was having a nervous breakdown, which, let's be honest, wasn't entirely inaccurate, but wasn't the vibe I was going for. Finally, I crafted the perfect message. Funny how some families reunite without the family. Guess I didn't get the memo about Diego's engagement celebration tonight. Hope everyone's having fun at the boring reunion. Clinking glasses, hashtag Denver Nights, hashtag not invited, hashtag married life, hashtag truth. I read it back about 20 times, analyzing every word like I was crafting a legal document that would be scrutinized by the Supreme Court. It was perfect, passive-aggressive enough to make my point, factual enough that Clara couldn't deny it, and just sarcastic enough to let everyone know I wasn't going down without a fight. The hashtags were the cherry on top. Hashtag Denver Nights would connect it to the local social scene that the Castillos dominated. Hashtag not invited would make sure everyone understood exactly what had happened. Hashtag married life would add that universal appeal that married people scrolling social media at 10 p.m. on a Saturday would relate to. And hashtag truth? That was just me being petty, and I was completely okay with that. I held my finger over the share button for what felt like an eternity. This was it. Once I posted this, there would be no taking it back. The Castillos would see it. Clara would see it. Everyone in their social circle would see it. I was about to air my dirty laundry in the most public way possible, and it felt both terrifying and absolutely exhilarating. Max wandered over and sat at my feet, looking up at me with those wise dog eyes that seemed to say, "Do it, human." They had it coming. I took a deep breath, said a little prayer to the social media gods, and hit share. The post went live immediately, appearing on my timeline like a digital bomb waiting to explode. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications. The likes started rolling in first. College buddies who were probably drunk scrolling and appreciated some weekend drama. Then came the comments. Bro, you okay? From my friend Jake. Yikes, what happened? From my coworker Sarah. Drama. Popcorn. From someone I barely remembered from high school. But the real validation came when I saw that little notification that made my heart skip a beat. Aunt Lydia 64 liked your post. Aunt Lydia herself, the woman who'd inadvertently exposed Clara's lie with her own Instagram celebration, had liked my passive-aggressive call-out. She'd probably been scrolling through her notifications, basking in the engagement her party photos were getting, when she stumbled across my post and realized exactly what it meant. I could practically feel the collective, oh shit, rippling through Denver's social scene as people started connecting the dots. The timing was too perfect, the specificity too obvious. Anyone who'd seen Aunt Lydia's engagement photos would immediately understand what my post was really about. My phone buzzed again. A text from Clara, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the screen. Delete it now. You're embarrassing me. Embarrassing her. That was rich. I was embarrassing her by telling the truth about being excluded from a family event I should have been invited to. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at one of their fancy dinner parties. I smiled at my phone, feeling more alive than I had in months. Oh, sweetheart, I thought, this is just the warm-up act. While I was sitting in my living room in pajama pants, watching my social media post blow up like a digital 4th of July fireworks show, the Castillo family's perfect evening was apparently hitting an iceberg of epic proportions. And let me tell you, watching it all unfold from the comfort of my sagging couch was better than any pay-per-view event I'd ever ordered. The notifications on my phone were coming in faster than I could read them. Every buzz, every ping, every little red was like a tiny victory in what had suddenly become the most satisfying Saturday night I'd had in months. My simple post about being excluded from Diego's engagement party was spreading through Denver's social scene like gossip at a high school reunion. The first wave of responses came from my own circle, college friends, coworkers, old buddies who remembered me from before I got absorbed into the Castillo family machine. These were people who'd watched me gradually become more and more isolated as Clara's family slowly, but surely made it clear that I wasn't really one of them. They'd been waiting for me to finally acknowledge what everyone could see, but nobody wanted to say out loud. Finally, someone said it, commented my buddy Mike, who'd watched me make excuses for missing family events for 3 years. About time you called them out, added Sarah from work, who'd heard more than her fair share of my frustrated venting during lunch breaks. But then something beautiful happened. People I barely knew started engaging with the post. Friends of friends who'd heard stories about the Castillo family's exclusive gatherings. Acquaintances who'd witnessed similar family drama in their own lives. Complete strangers who just appreciated the raw honesty of someone finally saying what needed to be said. The likes were climbing steadily, 50, 75, 100, which might not sound like much to those Instagram influencers with their millions of followers, but for a regular guy like me, it felt like winning the lottery. Each like was validation that I wasn't crazy, that being excluded from your own family's celebrations was, in fact, not okay. Then Ron, my best friend since college, and the only person who'd ever had the balls to tell me straight up that Clara's family treated me like garbage, did something that made me literally laugh out loud. He reposted my entire post to his own Instagram story with the caption, "Imagine throwing a family party and forgetting the husband exists." Yikes. Grimacing face. Ron had about twice as many followers as I did, including a bunch of people who moved in the same Denver social circles as the Castillos. His repost was like adding gasoline to a fire that was already burning pretty nicely on its own. Suddenly, my little passive-aggressive call-out wasn't just circulating among my modest friend group. It was spreading into the very social ecosystem that the Castillo family dominated. I could practically visualize what was happening at Diego's engagement party in real time. Picture it. There's Diego, probably in the middle of giving some heartfelt speech about love and family and new beginnings, when someone's phone buzzes. Maybe it's cousin Marisol, who's physically incapable of going more than 5 minutes without checking her social media. She glances at her phone, expecting to see more congratulations and heart eye emojis on her latest selfie, and instead sees my post spreading through her timeline like wildfire. The beauty of social media drama is that once it starts, it's almost impossible to contain. It's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube, except the toothpaste is made of pure, concentrated embarrassment, and it's being squeezed out by everyone you've ever met. Within an hour, my phone showed me something that made me feel like I'd just won the Super Bowl. Diego's engagement hashtag Diego and Emily 2023, was getting buried under the notifications from my post. Their perfectly curated celebration, with its professional photography and carefully coordinated social media strategy, was being overshadowed by one guy in pajama pants telling the truth about being left out. The comments on my post were getting more and more savage as word spread. Wait, they didn't invite the husband to the engagement party? That's cold even by Denver standards. I've heard stories about this family. They think they're royalty or something. Bro, you're better off without them. Anyone who excludes family like that has serious issues. And my personal favorite, from someone I'd never met. This is why I don't mess with rich people. They'll smile at your wedding and then not invite you to their kid's birthday party. But the real magic happened when the story started reaching people who actually knew the Castillos. Denver's high society might seem big, but it's actually a pretty small world when you get right down to it. Everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than bad news at a family reunion. I started seeing comments from people with names like Denver Socialite and Millahai Mom, who clearly moved in the same circles as Clara's family. Oh honey, I've seen this family at events. They're always perfectly coordinated, but something always felt off. Is this the same family that had that drama at the charity auction last year? I knew there was a reason I never saw him at their parties anymore. This explains everything. Each comment was like another nail in the coffin of the Castillo family's carefully maintained reputation. These people prided themselves on appearances, on being seen as the perfect, sophisticated family with old money and older values. Having their dirty laundry aired on social media, especially by someone they'd dismissed as unimportant, had to be killing them. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Clara, and this one was practically vibrating with panic. People are asking questions. This is humiliating. Delete it right now. Humiliating. That was the word she chose. Not, I'm sorry you felt left out, or we should have handled this differently, or even, let's talk about this when I get home. Just humiliating. Because the real problem wasn't that they'd excluded me. It was that I'd had the audacity to make it public. I could picture the scene at the engagement party now. Clara frantically checking her phone every 5 minutes, watching my post gain traction while trying to maintain that perfect Castillo composure. Oscar and Beatrice probably huddled in some corner, discussing damage control, like this was a corporate crisis instead of the natural consequence of their own behavior. And poor Diego, this was supposed to be his night, his moment to celebrate finding love and starting a new chapter with Emily. Instead, his engagement party was being remembered as the night his brother-in-law finally called out the family for their exclusionary bullshit. The irony was beautiful. They'd worked so hard to create the perfect celebration, with the right flowers and the right lighting and the right guest list. They'd probably spent weeks planning every detail, making sure everything looked flawless for social media. And here I was, a guy they'd written off as unimportant, single-handedly turning their picture-perfect evening into a cautionary tale about treating family like garbage. Somewhere between the shrimp cocktails and the champagne towers, the Castillos were choking on my sarcasm. And honestly, I was just getting started. Sunday night rolled around like a storm front moving across the Colorado plains. You could feel the electricity in the air and knew something big was about to hit. I'd spent the entire day basking in the aftermath of my social media nuclear bomb, watching the fallout spread through Denver's social scene like radioactive gossip. My post had racked up over 300 likes and enough comments to fill a small novel, most of them variations on, holy crap, your in-laws are terrible people. I was in the kitchen around 9 p.m., reheating leftover Chinese takeout and feeling pretty damn good about life, when I heard Clara's car pull into the driveway. The engine sound was different somehow, more aggressive, like she'd been driving with the kind of barely controlled fury that makes you press the gas pedal a little too hard and take corners a little too sharp. Max heard it too. His ears perked up and he gave me that look that dogs perfect somewhere around puppyhood, the one that says, oh, human. Someone's about to get their ass handed to them, and I'm pretty sure it's you. I didn't even try to pretend I wasn't ready for this confrontation. Hell, I'd been preparing for it all day, running through potential arguments in my head like I was cramming for the world's most passive-aggressive final exam. I had my talking points ready, my moral high ground thoroughly mapped out, and enough righteous indignation to fuel a small revolution. The front door slammed with the kind of force that rattled the windows and probably registered on seismographs in 3 counties. Clara's heels clicked against our hardwood floors like machine gun fire, each step announcing her approach with the subtlety of a marching band playing death metal. When she appeared in the kitchen doorway, I almost didn't recognize her. This wasn't the composed, perfectly put-together woman who'd kissed my forehead and lied to my face yesterday morning. This was Clara in full Castillo battle mode, still wearing that stunning emerald dress from the engagement photos. But now it looked less like elegant evening wear and more like armor she'd forgotten to take off after a war. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled in those Instagram photos, was now slightly disheveled, like she'd been running her fingers through it in frustration. Her makeup was still flawless, but there was something wild in her eyes that I'd never seen before. She looked like a woman who'd spent the last 24 hours watching her carefully constructed world implode, one social media notification at a time. She didn't even take off her coat or put down her purse. She just stood there in our kitchen doorway, vibrating with the kind of barely contained rage that makes normal people back away slowly and look for the nearest exit. "You," she said, pointing at me like I was a war criminal she'd been hunting for years, made everything worse. Not hello. Not we need to talk. Not even how was your weekend, honey. Just straight to the accusation, like we were picking up a conversation we'd started yesterday, instead of having our first real communication since she'd driven off to her boring family reunion. I raised my mug of reheated coffee, because if we were going to have this fight, I was going to be properly caffeinated for it, and took a deliberately slow sip before responding. "Worse than what, exactly?" I asked, going for that perfect tone of innocent confusion that I knew would drive her absolutely insane. "Worse than lying to your husband about where you were going? Worse than excluding me from a major family celebration? Worse than treating me like some kind of inconvenience that needed to be managed?" Clara's face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Anger, frustration, guilt, more anger, a touch of panic, and finally settling on that particular brand of indignation that rich people master when they're called out on their bad behavior. "It wasn't supposed to be a big deal," she practically shrieked, throwing her hands up like she was trying to explain quantum physics to a toddler. "Mom wanted a certain aesthetic for the photos, and she thought." "Ah, yes," I interrupted, setting my mug down with just enough force to make my point without actually breaking anything. "The aesthetic, the vibe. Can't have the working-class husband ruining the elegant family portrait, right? God forbid someone in khakis shows up in your perfectly coordinated Instagram feed." The way she flinched told me I'd hit the bullseye. That was exactly what had happened. Beatrice had probably taken one look at the engagement party planning and decided that I didn't fit the image they wanted to project. Too ordinary, too middle class, too much of a reminder that their precious daughter had married beneath her station. "You don't understand," Clara said, her voice taking on that whiny quality that I'd started hearing more and more lately. "The whole family was already going to be there, and Mom had this vision." "Her vision didn't include me," I said, and I could hear my own voice getting harder, more controlled. "Her vision of your family celebrating Diego's engagement didn't include your husband of 3 years. Do you see how that might be a problem, Clara?" She opened and closed her mouth a few times, looking like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. For the first time in our entire marriage, Clara Castillo, the woman who always had an answer for everything, who could smooth over any social situation with the right combination of charm and family money, was speechless. It was one night. She finally managed, but her voice was weaker now, like she was starting to realize how thin her excuses sounded when spoken out loud. "It was our marriage," I shot back, and the words hit the kitchen air like a slap. "It was you choosing to lie to me, exclude me, and then act like I was the problem for having feelings about it." Clara's composure cracked like cheap plaster. "You embarrassed the entire family. Do you have any idea what people are saying? Dad lost a potential client because someone saw your post and decided we had bad optics. Mom's bridge club is gossiping about us. Marisol's followers are asking questions about family drama. You turned Diego's engagement into a circus." I nearly spit my coffee across the kitchen. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I turned it into a circus? I asked, genuinely incredulous. Clara, sweetheart, I posted the truth on my own Instagram account. The circus was already there. I just pointed out that the elephants were dancing and nobody had told me there was a show. She sputtered, searching for words that would somehow make this my fault instead of a natural consequence of their own actions. But we both knew the truth, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. You made a choice, I continued, setting my mug down and really looking at her for what felt like the first time in months. You chose them over me. You chose their comfort over our marriage. You chose to lie to me rather than stand up for me with your family. And now you're mad because I didn't just sit here quietly and pretend it was okay. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt, frustration, or just the sheer exhaustion of trying to maintain a lie that everyone could see through. It's not that simple, she whispered. Actually, I said, grabbing my jacket from the back of the kitchen chair, it really is. I walked out of that kitchen like I was stepping out of a prison I hadn't even realized I'd been living in. 20 minutes later, I had a suitcase packed with enough clothes to last a week, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, and Max looking at me with those soulful eyes that seemed to say, "Take me with you, human. I've seen what goes down in this house." But Max would be better off staying put, at least for now. Dogs don't get divorced. They just get confused when their humans start acting weird and sleeping in different places. Ron answered his door in sweatpants and a Denver Broncos t-shirt that had seen better decades, holding a beer and wearing the kind of grin that told me he'd been following my social media drama in real time. Well, he said, stepping aside to let me drag my suitcase through his doorway. If it isn't the guy who just told Denver's royal family to kiss his ass via Instagram. I was wondering when you'd show up here. Ron's apartment was everything mine wasn't. Bachelor pad deluxe, complete with a couch that could comfortably seat 6 people, a 65-inch TV that dominated the living room, and a refrigerator stocked with enough beer to supply a small football team. The place screamed, guy who makes good money and doesn't have to run every furniture purchase past someone who cares about thread counts and color coordination. So, he said, popping open a beer and handing it to me. Want to tell me how it feels to go nuclear on the Castillo family empire? I took a long drink of what might have been the most satisfying beer of my life and sank into his couch, which was so comfortable it felt like being hugged by furniture. Honestly, it feels like I should have done it 3 years ago. Ron laughed, that genuine, infectious laugh that reminded me why we'd been friends since college. Dude, I've been waiting for this moment since your wedding. Remember when I tried to warn you about her family during your bachelor party? I did remember. Ron had pulled me aside at some dive bar in Lodo and tried to delicately suggest that maybe I was rushing into marrying someone whose family treated me like a temporary inconvenience. I'd been so head over heels in love that I'd brushed off his concerns like they were drunk rambling. You said they were going to eat me alive, I admitted, settling deeper into his couch. You said I'd lose myself trying to fit into their world. And what did you say to me? That love conquers all. I shook my head at my own naive optimism. That Clara was different from her family, and that eventually they'd come around and accept me. How'd that work out for you? I gestured around his apartment with my beer bottle. I'm sleeping on your couch because my wife lied to me about attending her brother's engagement party. You tell me. But here's the thing, sitting there in Ron's living room, drinking beer and watching SportsCenter without having to pretend I cared about the scores, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe years. It was like I'd been holding my breath for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually breathe. My phone, which I'd left on the coffee table, kept buzzing with notifications. My Instagram post was still gaining traction, spreading through Denver's social media ecosystem like wildfire in a drought. Each buzz was another like, another comment, another person validating that what the Castillos had done was, in fact, completely screwed up. Holy shit, Ron said, scrolling through the comments on his own phone. You're going viral, man. Like, actually viral. He was right. My follower count had tripled in 2 days. People I hadn't talked to since high school were sliding into my DMs with messages like, "Bro, I saw your post," and had to reach out. Similar thing happened to me with my ex's family. But the real validation came from complete strangers who'd somehow stumbled across my story and felt compelled to share their own experiences with toxic in-laws and exclusionary family dynamics. My little passive-aggressive call-out had apparently struck a nerve with people all over the country who'd felt dismissed, marginalized, or just plain ignored by their spouse's family. The comments kept rolling in. This is why I divorced my first husband. His family acted like I didn't exist. Rich people love to pretend they're inclusive until it comes time to actually include people. You dodged a bullet, King. Family that treats you like this will never change. And then, around midnight, something amazing happened. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, it was someone from a Denver marketing firm I'd never heard of. Hi, is this the guy who wrote that viral post about being excluded from the family party? The voice asked. Yeah? I replied, genuinely confused about why a marketing company would be calling me at midnight on a Sunday. We've been following your story, and we're wondering if you'd be interested in doing some freelance copywriting for us. That post of yours, the voice, the authenticity, the way it connected with people, that's exactly the kind of content our clients are looking for. I nearly dropped my beer. You're offering me work because of my social media breakdown? We're offering you work because you know how to tell a story that people actually give a shit about. That post has been shared over 1,000 times in 2 days. Our clients pay big money to get that kind of engagement. After I hung up, I just stared at my phone for a solid 5 minutes. Ron was grinning at me like he'd just watched me win the lottery. Let me get this straight, he said. You finally tell your in-laws what you really think of them. Your post goes viral, and now people want to pay you for your writing? Apparently. Dude, this is the best divorce strategy I've ever seen. You're getting a career upgrade and revenge at the same time. Meanwhile, based on the increasingly frantic texts I was getting from Clara, the Castillo family was experiencing what could only be described as a full-scale reputation meltdown. Apparently, Oscar had indeed lost a potential business client who decided the family had bad optics after seeing my post. Beatrice's Precious Bridge Club was buzzing with gossip about the family drama. Marisol was fielding questions from her Instagram followers about whether the family was really as elitist as they seemed. And all of this because I'd finally told the truth about being excluded from a family event I should have been invited to. The irony was beautiful. While I was sitting on Ron's comfortable couch, drinking good beer and fielding job offers, the Castillo family was scrambling to contain the damage from their own behavior. They'd worked so hard to maintain their perfect image, and now it was cracking like expensive makeup in hot weather. You know what the best part is? I said to Ron as we settled in to watch some late-night comedy show. What's that? I'm not even trying to hurt them. I'm just telling the truth. And apparently, the truth about their behavior is damaging enough all by itself. My phone buzzed again. Another notification, another stranger sharing their own story of feeling excluded by family. Another person finding solidarity in my small act of defiance. And for the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep without worrying about whether I was good enough, rich enough, or sophisticated enough to deserve a place at the table. Because I'd finally realized something important. The right table doesn't make you beg for a seat. 3 weeks later, I found myself driving up Interstate 70 toward Breckenridge with the windows down, music blasting, and the kind of genuine smile on my face that I'd almost forgotten I was capable of producing. The mountains ahead of me looked like something out of a postcard, all snow-capped peaks and infinite blue sky. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged exactly where I was. This wasn't one of those desperate, I need to find myself road trips that divorced guys take in movies. This wasn't me running away from my problems or hiding from the wreckage of my marriage. This was me celebrating the fact that I'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, and right now, I was gloriously, intentionally alone. The freelance work had taken off like a rocket ship fueled by pure spite and good coffee. Emma Sullivan from Breakthrough Marketing had turned out to be exactly as brilliant as her initial message suggested. And she'd connected me with 3 other companies who were looking for someone who could write copy that felt authentic instead of like it had been generated by a committee of robots. Turns out, years of living with people who communicated exclusively through passive-aggressive subtext had given me a real talent for reading between the lines and writing content that actually connected with human beings. Who knew that surviving the Castillo family drama would turn out to be the best marketing education I could have asked for? I'd rented a cabin in Breckenridge for the weekend. Nothing fancy, just a little place with a fireplace, a decent kitchen, and a view of the mountains that made you remember why people write songs about Colorado. The freelance checks were coming in regularly enough that I could afford small luxuries like weekend getaways, and more importantly, I could afford them without having to justify the expense to anyone or worry about whether they fit with someone else's idea of how I should be spending my money. The drive up had been therapeutic in that way that only mountain highways can be. Each mile of elevation gained felt like another layer of Castillo family bullshit falling away. By the time I reached the summit of Loveland Pass, I was laughing out loud at the memory of Beatrice's horrified reaction to my social media stunt, as she'd apparently taken to calling it in the circles where these things mattered. According to my network of Denver social media spies, and yes, I now had a network of Denver social media spies, which was both pathetic and oddly empowering. The Castillo family's reputation had taken a beating that would have made a professional boxer proud. Oscar's business connections were treating him like he had a contagious case of bad family PR. Beatrice had been quietly uninvited from 2 charity board positions after whispers about the family's inclusivity issues reached the wrong ears. And Clara? Poor Clara was apparently taking the brunt of the social fallout, fielding awkward questions at every event about why she'd thought it was okay to exclude her husband from family celebrations. The Denver Society pages, which had always treated the Castillos like royalty, were now publishing subtle little digs about authentic family values and the importance of including everyone in life's special moments. But the real victory had come 2 days ago, when I received a text from Clara that was longer than our wedding vows and roughly 10 times more honest. She'd finally admitted that the engagement party exclusion hadn't been a one-time thing. It had been part of a pattern that had been going on for months. Her mother had been systematically excluding me from family events, and Clara had been going along with it because it was easier than fighting. Easier than fighting. That phrase had been rattling around in my head like a marble in a tin can ever since. My marriage had ended not because of some dramatic betrayal or irreconcilable differences, but because my wife had decided that keeping me around wasn't worth the minor inconvenience of standing up to her mother. The cabin I'd rented was perfect, small enough that I didn't feel lost in it, but big enough that I could spread out my laptop, my notes, and my growing pile of freelance contracts without feeling cramped. I'd brought a cooler full of actually good beer, the kind I'd never bought when I was married because Clara preferred wine, and I'd somehow convinced myself that her preferences should override mine in our shared living space. On Saturday morning, I hiked up to one of the overlooks above Breckenridge, carrying a thermos of hot cocoa and my phone, which had become less of a weapon of social media warfare and more of a tool for documenting my own life instead of obsessing over other people's lives. The view from the summit was ridiculous. Like, postcard perfect, makes you understand why people move to Colorado and become ski bums ridiculous. I could see the entire 10-mile range spread out in front of me, snow-covered peaks stretching toward the horizon like nature's own cathedral. I sat on a convenient boulder, opened my thermos, and took a moment to really appreciate where I was. 3 weeks ago, I'd been sitting on Ron's couch, fielding angry texts from my wife about how I'd embarrassed her family. Now I was sitting on top of a mountain, literally and figuratively, with job offers in my email and the kind of peace that comes from finally being honest about who you are and what you're worth. I pulled out my phone and took a selfie, not because I needed to prove anything to anyone, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The photo showed a guy who looked genuinely happy for the first time in months, with mountains in the background and the kind of smile that reaches all the way to your eyes. Then I raised my thermos of hot cocoa toward the peaks and whispered, "Here's to being uninvited and still winning." It wasn't champagne, and there wasn't a crystal chandelier or coordinated family outfit in sight. But it was my toast, at my celebration, for my victory over people who tried to make me feel small and unimportant. And honestly, it felt better than any Castillo family gathering I'd ever been excluded from. I posted the photo to Instagram with a caption that felt like closing a chapter. Funny thing about being erased from someone else's story, you get to write your own instead. Cheers from the summit, where the air is thin but the bullshit is non-existent. Hashtag Colorado, hashtag new chapter, hashtag mountain life, hashtag authentic living, hashtag no filters needed. The likes started rolling in immediately, but this time they felt different. These weren't pity likes or drama likes or schadenfreude likes. These were celebration likes from people who understood that sometimes you have to walk away from toxic situations to find out who you really are. My phone buzzed with comments from my new freelance clients. from college friends I'd reconnected with, from Ron who added, finally, with about 15 fire emojis, and from strangers who'd been following my journey from excluded husband to independent entrepreneur. But the comment that made me smile the biggest was from Emma Sullivan. This is exactly the kind of authentic voice that brands are looking for. Keep being you. It's clearly working. As I sat there on my mountaintop, drinking cocoa and watching the sun paint the peaks in shades of gold and pink, I realized something that should have been obvious all along. The best revenge isn't getting even with people who've wronged you. The best revenge is building a life so good that their opinions stop matching entirely. The Castillos had wanted to erase me from their perfect family picture, but in doing so, they'd forced me to create my own picture instead. And my picture? It had mountains in it, and honest laughter, and work that mattered, and friendships that weren't conditional on my net worth or social connections. If marriage is a party, then I'd rather throw my own. Guest list wide open, dress code optional, and absolutely no tuxedos required.